Hello, everybody, and welcome to the PGA Championship Tournament Preview video. I am John Hasselbauer. I go by PGA Tout on Twitter, so you can find me there. This is the PGA Championship, and I am so excited for the second major of the year. We are coming back to New York, a neglected part of the country by the PGA Tour. For some reason, there are no tournaments in one of the biggest golf markets in the world with some of the most diverse golf courses in the country. And we haven't really been here since the Northern Trust after that was sunset from the FedEx Cup playoffs. So that's strange that they've stopped coming to New York. But in any sense, I'm happy that they're back. It is upstate New York, so I've already seen a lot of comments of like, "Oh, I can't wait to see the raucous, rowdy New York fan base." Like, this is not like a Rangers game. This is not a Knicks game. Those fans are not in Rochester. So we're in Rochester. This is like a 5-hour drive from like Manhattan. So it's not in the heart of the city. I'm sure they'll put like little, I don't know, the major is coming to New York and like a New York City skyline like promo this week, but we are closer to Canada than we are to Manhattan, which means that we are going to have very different climate than anything we've seen so far this year. I feel like the entire golf season has been in sort of like the southern United States up until this point, at least from a PGA Tour standpoint. And now we finally have a chance to see a little bit more conditions, which I think makes things a little more interesting. Justin Thomas caught some heat for saying that Rochester caught a little bit of snow within the last few months. I don't think that's actually true, but it is definitely not as warm as what we've seen in Texas and Florida for, the last few months on the PGA Tour. I think weather this week is going to be probably like 50s. So, from my perspective, I don't really find that to be cold. But some people might be playing in sweaters and caps, especially if the wind picks up, especially if it gets wet. Seeing a little bit of inconsistency in the forecast this week, but it does seem like it's not going to be ideal playing conditions. So, as always, something to keep an eye on. It's only Tuesday right now, so we have one more day to really figure out exactly what the weather is going to be before tournament play starts on Thursday. But it does seem like with what the weather is projecting to be, that there might be some weather wave advantage, whether you are trying to do some head-to-heads or first round leaders. If there's a wave advantage, that might be something to keep an eye on. At the 2022 PGA Championship at Southern Hills, weather played a significant factor, and Justin Thomas actually caught the bad weather wave and was one of very few to kind of hold his own when the weather was at its worst. And lo and behold, he ends up winning, but he was kind of an exception. Everybody else from his wave was largely, out of play because there was a lot of wind and rain. I don't think it'll be that severe, but again, it's a major championship. You want to cover every base this week. So something to keep an eye on. Before we get any further, it is major championship week. I'm not going to spend any time on the AT&T Byron Nelson last week or the Live Tour event last week. I think both were polar opposite conditions to what we're going to see here. So Jason Day and Dustin Johnson won. Their price will be shorter, and I don't think it really matters because anything they had to do last week doesn't really translate to what you need to do at Oak Hill. In terms of this week, I will share my screen now to the player page here, my tournament preview. You can find that linked in the description to this video. While you're there, make sure you are subscribed. Please comment if you have a lean this week, somebody that you think is under the radar that you're going to be backing, or somebody whose odds you think have slipped to a point of a must-buy territory. The lines, in addition to all the content that we're going to be putting out this week for PGA Championship, we're also deep into NBA content, MLB content on a daily basis. So plenty of great content on this site. If you're subscribed, you won't miss a thing. So please make sure you do so. And then our Discord is, you can see here, we have 170 members online at the moment. And you can always subscribe to that Discord channel by clicking this little icon up here. I put all of my bets in for free. Because it is a free Discord, you can see that at any point in time so that you're not missing out on any closing line value if you are interested in where my bets are. Or you can stay to the end of this video and see who my bets are there as well. All of it's free. That's the moral of the story. So getting to the task at hand with the 2023 PGA Championship at Oak Hill. What can I say that hasn't already been said in the first few days of tournament week? Oak Hill has hosted 6 majors, or this will be the 6th. It's hosted 5 before, 3 U.S. Opens and 2 PGA Championships. The last time we were here was 2013 when Jason Duffner beat Jim Furyk. It was a hyper positional course at that time. It played under 7,200 yards. It was heavily tree lined to the point where players who hit the fairway still didn't have a direct angle to the green. So not only was it important to hit fairways, but it was important to hit the right side of those fairways. The fairways were extremely pinched, so near misses were in the rough, and then it was just impossible to hold these greens. But all of that being said, the winning score was 10 under. Jason Duffner set the course scoring record that year with a 63, which is 7 under. I think that scoring record will be well protected given all of the adjustments that have been made to this course to make it play even more difficult. And I think that's a sticking point this week too, is how will the changes in conditions affect play? The biggest change to this course you'll see is that a lot of the trees, I believe it was over 600 trees, have been removed. So it is still Oak Hill, but it's a little less oaky than the last time we saw it. It's definitely hilly. It's definitely elevated. They definitely have greens that are elevated off the ground. So it's a little bit more tricky to roll it up onto these greens like we may have seen at a Winged Foot. There are still like angles that you can take to do that, but I still think it's important to play this course out of the fairway so that you can control the ball on these greens. They do slope from back to front, as we've seen with most Donald Ross designs. And the overarching decision by Andrew Green, who came in 2019 to renovate this course, was to restore everything that Donald Ross had intended. And, just for background of why the trees were removed, this course was established over a century ago. And when the oaks were planted on this course, they were much smaller, and they grew to a point where they were blocking out views that were intended to be seen on this property. And they were blocking out angles that were not meant to be hazardous or taken away they were not rewarding good shots on the fairway because they were still kind of blocking approach shots. So Andrew Green came in, he opened it up just a little bit. A lot of people are going to say because he's opening it up, it's more like favoring the bombers, favoring a one-dimensional approach and making it easier. I don't believe any of that because the greenside complexes are much more difficult. I love what he did with the bunkers here. It used to be, you would expect a PGA Tour pro to get up and down out of the rough, out of a greenside bunker because they're so skilled there, and it's really not that penal. These sand traps are actually hazards. We kind of saw this at Southern Hills too, where the sand was so coarse that you couldn't really spin out of it, and guys were having so much trouble getting it close when they hit it into the bunkers. Not necessarily because of the coarse grain this time around, but just the ruggedness, the way that this trap kind of looks to the eye, the way that it's going to roll into these traps is going to be a lot of awkward, stances outside of the traps, just uncomfortable, positioning. And here you're not going to roll to the center of these bunkers either. So it's not going to be easy to get up and down for par out of these sand traps. And you can look at sand saves gained. I think that helps, but this is just going to be such a different beast than what everybody's used to seeing. It's just going to be all around difficult to scramble if you miss greens. So I think that puts a premium this week on ball striking. That's nothing new at a major championship. This is playing just under 7,400 yards. So length is going to be important. I would say it's not, I don't think it's a prerequisite to be long here. I think it's extremely helpful to be average and above average in distance. I think you are definitely in trouble if you are below average in distance. But Winged Foot was a course where if you were top 10 in driving distance, you were just going to do well because nobody could hit those fairways. It's just hit it as far as you can, advance it out of the rough, get it close to the green. Those greens were massive, so you could just get on there, and then it kind of became like a lag putting contest, if that's a thing, or just, a par fest. I mean, Bryson was the only player to shoot under par there. This course is not at Oak Hill is not long for the sake of being long. It's long in the right places. There's 7 par 4s that are over 450 yards, but none are over 500. So they're all kind of concentrated in that 450 to 500 range. There's a creek, Allen's Creek, that runs throughout this course that is going to force layups here to the point where I think it does mitigate the distance advantage just a little bit. And the par 5s, just looking at the course overheads, listening to the players, looking at the yardage, I think it's going to be really tough for players to reach these par 5s in 2. Again, the creek comes into play, which kind of forces a layup here. And it's just, there's so much trouble around these greens that hitting a 280-yard shot into these really small greens with hazards everywhere is probably not even their best bet. So I think a lot of players are going to be encouraged to lay back, make these par 5s a 3-shot hole. And if none of these par 5s are going to be reached in 2, then it's really going to be difficult to find too many birdie opportunities here. So what I see is a scrambling contest where players with above average distance are going to position themselves the best, but also players who can play from the fairway are going to actually be the only ones who can generate birdie opportunities, because it's just going to be near impossible to hold these greens on approaches from the rough. So step 1, hit the fairway, ideally far. Step 2, hit the green and avoid the hazards that you need to avoid. And they're going to tuck these pins and really bait people into, you need to hit a perfect shot to hit it close to get a birdie opportunity. And if you don't, you're probably going to be laying back conservatively to the middle of these greens, which are not that large. Give yourself like a 30-foot birdie putt, walk away with your par and move on. I think that's going to be what most of these holes are, especially the par 3s, which are all over 200 yards. 3 of the 4 are over or well over 200 yards. So a lot of long iron approaches. That's nothing new for a major championship. And, I just think this is going to be a stacked leaderboard where the guys who show up in majors are going to show up at this course because it just embodies every single thing you would look for at a major championship venue. It looks the part. The conditions are going to be really interesting, but I think they're going to be fair. It's not bomb and gouge as far as everything that I've seen. It really is a course where it's fair. You could play a little bit more conservatively and hit some fairways. It's not pinched to the point where nobody's going to be hitting them, which was the issue at Winged Foot. So I'm really excited to see this play out. That's sort of the high level, like everything that I'm expecting of this course. But of course, we have a whole lot more that's not just high level in my tournament preview. Again, that is linked in these description here. We are covering everything in this article from just the odds on favorites in this odds table. We have all the qualification criteria. I think that was a hot button topic this week because not everybody who I guess the 150 best world golf rated players in the world are not here. There are some stipulations like past PGA senior champion gets in here. There's 20 PGA professionals in the field this week, which really takes us from a field of 156 to a field of 136, which is still about double of what we saw at the Masters. So it's a much more competitive field this week than what we saw last week. Other notes on the field itself, it's going to be Jon Rahm and Scottie Scheffler, co-favorites this week. They were essentially co-favorites at the Masters for the first major of the year. Rory McIlroy was sort of in that trio at the Masters, and he's sort of drifted a little bit further back with 2 missed cuts and an ugly top 50 finish, I believe, at Quail Hollow, where he has never played poorly before in his entire career. So Rory, you can get a little bit of a discount on. Let me see what his odds are now. He's about 11-1 consensus odds. You could probably find a 12 at this point. If you are interested in Rory, in theory, if he just kind of snaps out of this funk and brings his best stuff, which he is always liable to do that, it's a perfect fit for him. He can clear these fairway bunkers. He can fly it, 320 on command. He can hit fairways at a high clip. He hits that high ball flight, which is really necessary on courses like this that are firm and fast and hard to hold the greens on. So he's played well at all the comp courses, all the difficult scoring condition courses. John Rahm, for what it's worth, was the third favorite at the Masters, sort of the forgotten man of the big three going into that week, and he won. So I don't think you have to overreact to the form. But if you want to get like a discounted price, there's guys with better immediate form. I would say Brooks, Cantlay, and Xander are in significantly better form right now, with less question marks than Rory McIlroy, and they're available at double the odds. So I think naturally the market is noticing that those three guys in Koepka, Cantlay, and Xander are extremely popularly bet this week. Rory, I've seen on like one or two cards total, so the guys are a little scared given the recent form. But you've heard this before. He's a member at Oak Hill. His wife is from Rochester or the surrounding area. He has seen this course a bunch. He hung out here a lot during COVID. So he's familiar. I don't know how much of an edge that really gives you. He doesn't live in Rochester. Obviously, he lives in Florida. So he's seen the course. He's seen a post renovation that's worth something. But the best players in the world will find a way to get a couple practice rounds in throughout the year at the PGA Championship venue. So I don't think he's the only one who's ever played this course before, which means I think that narrative is a little overblown. Also going through the, I guess the changes to Oak Hill, we've already really talked about it. It's not going to be positional like it was in 2013. It's much longer now. It's much more open. And it really just embodies all the characteristics of a major championship venue, classical tree line design. We've seen this type of course in a Winged Foot, in a Bethpage Black, in a Brookline, although Brookline's probably the least likely to be overpowered with driver. And I think that despite the current prevailing narrative that this is Winged Foot 2.0, I do think fairway finders who are about like average in driving distance will do well here. If you're hitting 200-yard approaches on every hole and you're still in the fairway, I think you're still going to have some trouble, especially if the conditions are what they are. I would rather have like a 150 shot from the rough than a 200 from the fairway here over the totality of the tournament. So, that's something to consider. But in general, my betting card is not going to be bomber. It's more, I'd rather you be well-rounded, especially with your short game. You're just going to have to lean on that so much. If you have a bad short game, it's going to be really hard to hide it. Anything else worth noting for Oak Hill? I'll switch over to the PGA Championship odds page, which you can also find on thelines.com if you just search for PGA Championship odds. This goes into even more depth. You could see the full betting board here. You could see how it is really a big 2.5 of Scheffler and Rahm, and then Rory is kind of in this no man's land by himself. You can get him as long as 14 now, so he continues to drift even further. And then there's this sort of hodgepodge of Xander, Cantlay, Koepka, Finau, DJ. There's 35 here, but predominantly he's in that like mid 2,500 range. Day, Thomas, and Morikawa, I would say, are kind of in those like 20s range. Hard to make a stance there. I did personally. I picked two out of that group. I think the decision here from a betting standpoint is, do you make an extremely short card and essentially single bullet it with Scheffler and Rahm, one or the other, or do you hedge your exposure across multiple of these other names? I never find it very fun to do a single bullet bet, especially at a major when like the entertainment value is at an all-time high. So yes, I can't poke any holes in anybody who wants to bet Scheffler or Rahm. They're both playing exceptional. They will almost certainly be top 10, top 20 finishers this week. But from my perspective, I just couldn't get there. If it was like 10-1, I absolutely would have been there. But I just couldn't do it as a single bullet. So I chose to skip. But if either of them win, I won't be surprised, and I'll have plenty of exposure to both of those players in DFS. I would say probably all of my lineups will have one of the two of those. So we'll see how that goes for me. Going past the odds board, and again, this is where actually let me go back to the top because we are sorting for to win. But I think something that probably bears repeating is you can look up any prop market you want just by going to this PGA Championship odds page. You got the grid across all the legal sports books in your state. You can even filter it by state. So if you're in a different state, it'll show you which legal books are available in that one. So not just win, but because it's a major, we get all of these secondary markets. I always bet these markets in major in the Masters. I'm not 100% sure if I will go this far to do like top debutante for the PGA Championship. I think that might be a little unnecessary. But you can also do like top English player. You can see here Tyrrell Hatton's in the best form. It's a pretty even race actually for all these guys. Matt Wallace is somebody who's so hit or miss. He might even be worth digging a dabble here because he was someone who played really well, like a Bethpage Black, for example. So that's just something to consider this week. We also have first round leader markets, which you can also use this page to filter for. So getting past the odds grid, we'll look at the course breakdown as well. Just to avoid being repetitive, I would say, we've covered all of these specs already, but comp courses is the one last thing that I do want to speak a little bit on. I think that's going to be crucial when we get to a brand new course that we've never seen before. What courses embody similar characteristics that we can draw from. For me, I think the number one course comp, there's a few. I would say the number one major course comp is, for me, the Country Club at Brookline, where we have the U.S. Open. I think the ruggedness of the hazards around the green here, it's a little bit less quirky at Oak Hill, where you had like sort of like natural quarries, rock foundations and stuff like that just kind of came into play randomly. But it's a course that's going to emphasize total driving and not something that I think every contender needs to be above average in driving distance. I was very high on Colin Morikawa at the U.S. Open last year, and he was the best player in the field for 3 out of 4 rounds, and he had one awful round. So I think he still should have won the U.S. Open last year. I was on him. I was also on Will Zalatoris, so a lot of close calls. But I think that's a good reference point for this week. And then we've also talked about Bethpage Black and Winged Foot as sort of like Northeast classical long courses with elevated greens. I think all of those comps make sense. Outside of those three, which I would say are in their own tier, the other like recent major venues I think make sense to reference here would be Southern Hills, the host of the 2022 PGA Championship, Kiowa Island, although I actually just played Kiowa Island up here. I don't think the driving is comparable really at all, but it's a course that's suitable to players with longer driving distance, and then around the green kind of hitting these like chip shots into elevated greens with tricky sand hazards. I think that can be translatable, and the scoring was extremely difficult that week. I think we should expect to see similar challenging scoring conditions this week. Torrey Pine's another one where you're just going to get a lot of like long iron approaches from over 200 yards from penal rough into like tricky greenside complexes and thick rough around the green. I think all of that makes sense here. You get a little bit more character out of Oak Hill. You get a little bit more like strategic holes where it might like make sense to lay up off the tee more often here than it would at Torrey Pines. But I think if you played well at Torrey Pines, you could do well here as well. And then from a non-major standpoint, I really like Muirfield Village here. I think just the way that this course looks, the way it's manicured, the way that it just like is easy on the eyes. They're upkept in a very similar way. They're both very similarly tree lined. They have creeks that come into play, a lot of water that you have to kind of navigate past, and some tricky, thick rough around the greens, and fast bent grass greens. So there's a lot about Muirfield Village that I love this week, from a course comp standpoint, and we will be there in 2 weeks. So something to also be mindful of. Depending on how players play this week, I think that could translate well for the Memorial. And then lastly, I also have like Quail Hollow, Augusta National, and Bay Hill in here, Riviera, just challenging week to week PGA Tour courses. East Lake is a Donald Ross design. I don't think it's a great comp, but none of the Donald Ross courses that we see on the PGA Tour between East Lake and Sedgefield and Detroit Golf Club, they're just not really the best comps. They're all like very positional, which is actually what Oak Hill used to be. But this is a whole new element of needing driving distance, which I think the difficult scoring conditions and need to be long, which are two combined characteristics that just are not really present in any other course. And it is kind of difficult to draw any trends out of East Lake with the staggered start scoring conditions. But Xander Schauffele and Rory McIlroy are probably the two best players at that course. And I think they both stack up to play very well here. So maybe there's something in that as well. That I think is everything I can say about Oak Hill. So I will now switch it over to my model, and we'll talk a little bit about the key stats that I think are most important for Oak Hill this week. I will zoom in a little bit more so you can get a better view of that. And yeah, so looking at the key stats this week, I would say comp course history, all those courses that we just went through, that's where I want to use as a basis. This is not a course, especially when we talk about last week being played at ATT Byron Nelson at Craig Ranch. Like, there's nothing I really care about that translates from that course to this course. I think the PGA Tour did a poor job of scheduling to have that be your like quote unquote tune-up week. I think in other weeks, even like TPC San Antonio works as a tune-up in the Valero Texas Open for Augusta, just because it's long. You have a lot of like long iron shots. It can be tricky, especially if the wind picks up. Like, that can be a tune-up course. There's nothing about TPC Craig Ranch that really sets anybody up for Oak Hill, and it's not particularly close geographically to Rochester. So they could have got a better field if they picked a different course that was, I don't know, in the New York metropolitan area, which continues to be disregarded by the PGA Tour. But in any case, those comp courses should serve well. Like difficult scoring conditions is what we care about, whether that be in majors or just difficult PGA Tour stops. I put approach around the green and off the tee rather than doing just a blanket tee to green. I want all three of those segmented out. Really, if you're elite in, let's say, approach and around the green, but you're terrible off the tee, that's not what I want to see here. And if you look for these sort of outliers, it's like Victor Hovland, elite in approach and off the tee, but awful around the green. No thanks. Matt Fitzpatrick, granted, more recently his approach game has turned around, but if you're a player who is elite off the tee and elite around the green, but not good with your approach play, that's just a player that I'm going to start to kind of strike through when I go through the list here. And then you have Colin Morikawa, who's 85th and around the green. Again, another player who is probably going to get exposed over 4 rounds when he misses these greens. Nobody's going to hit these greens at like 80% in regulation. So that's where your bogeys are going to come from if you're missing too many greens and you can't scramble reliably. So got to be good in all three of these stat categories. I also put stroke gained tee to green over the last 12 rounds just to make sure I'm picking up on the guys who are in the best immediate form over the last 3 rounds leading in. I have strokes gained total in majors over the last 5 years. So I just plugged in all of the major venues. I did Will caveat that I didn't include the Open Championship. I think that's just an entirely different test. The elements play a factor that they don't necessarily here. And the Open Championship last year at St. Andrews became more of a birdie fest, not exactly demanding conditions. So these major strokes gained total metrics are pulling from the Masters, the PGA Championship, and the U.S. Open over the last 5 years. Par 4 scoring from 450 to 500. I don't typically harp too much on hole ranges, but 7 holes will be between this range at Oak Hill. And I think that is actually going to like make or break the tournament. So just to look at who these players are who score well on long par 4s. It's Cantlay, Homa, Justin Thomas, Scheffler, Finau. Like that top 5, it makes sense. Those are guys who play well in difficult conditions. They have, proven they can win on long courses, and just are that's what separates a player who's good in difficult conditions versus a player who's good in a birdie fest, because these are going to be your bogey holes. And if you either birdie them or just avoid bogeys on these holes, these 7, you're going to be positioned very well to do well this week. I've got proximity from 200 plus here at a smaller weight. But I do think that's important as well, just because we're looking at about 7,400 on a par 70. So that is going to be important. And all of the par 3s will feature those long 200 plus approaches. Bent grass putting, that's important this week. Augusta is really the last pure bent course we've seen. And before that, you'd have to look back to the 2022 season. So we haven't seen a lot of bent. There are players like a Patrick Cantlay who just seem to show up on bent grass only. Jordan Spieth is another good example of that. So there are bent specialists. Bent is primarily what we see in the Northeast. Even like Bethpage is kind of listed as POA, but it's nothing like a West Coast POA. And even Bethpage Black was sort of a POA bent mix. So if you've played well and putted well in the Northeast, especially in the state of New York, you'll be used to this type of grass. And that might give you an edge over somebody who lives in like Florida full time and specializes in Bermuda. Definitely a different service. Bogey avoidance, driving distance, sand saves, and total putting. And then scrambling. These are all just like kind of primarily short game stats, just to round out. I want like a cohesive, well-rounded player this week. And driving distance is something I only put 5% weight on it because I think, that's more like a testament to I care more about well-roundedness than driving distance. But also, if you've played well in the comp courses and you've played well to majors, you probably are inherently a long player. So it's not completely lost. It's not like it's only 5% weighting. Okay, so that is everything I'm looking for in a player this week. If we zoom in on who the top 5 is, the top 10 in the model. Typically in a major week, there are very few surprises. I would say that is the case here once again with Jon Rahm, number 1 in the model. He's followed by Tony Finau, Rory McIlroy, Xander Schauffele, Patrick Cantlay in the top 5, and then Jason Day coming off that win. Scotty Scheffler all the way down at 7. That's a little surprising, but I think that is being driven primarily by this proximity from 200 plus, ranking near last in the field, which is surprising. That could actually just mean that he is not leaving himself 200 yards out too often as one of the longer hitters in this field. So that is definitely something that I am going to keep an eye on, because he is 4th in par 4 scoring from 450 to 500, which is typically the types of holes where you do get those 200 plus approaches from. So that's interesting. I don't think he should be that low. And I think it's really just the 200 plus that's driving him down. So I still like Scotty, even though he's 7th in the model. Xander Schauffele is 8, Justin Thomas is 9, and Max Homa is 10. I also have this listed here by odds. This is kind of stagnant. This is what the odds were on Sunday, I want to say. So there have been some odds movement, but I will filter this now to my outright bets. So for the PGA Championship, I have 6 outrights on my card. I did toy around with the idea of betting a single bullet with Rahm or Scheffler, but ultimately there was a lot of like characteristics that I was looking for that I found Little separation in those key categories from that secondary tier in the 20s versus just the number one or number two player in the field. So hopefully this also adds a little entertainment value. Even if Rahm or Scheffler kind of run away with it and have like a big lead on Sunday, if I have like a chaser in the mix, that'll still work. I'll still be happy to track that along. I started my card with Patrick Cantlay. He is a popular bet this week. I just think he was mispriced. I think he should be the consensus for fourth best player in the world right now after Rahm, Scheffler, and Rory. I think he is in better form right now than Rory, so I would say his form is probably third best in the world at the current moment. And he's number one in par 4 scoring from 450 to 500. He's number one putting on bent grass. We saw what he did at the 2021 BMW Championship at Caves Valley, where he literally single-handedly won it with his putter. His putting, if we look at more like immediate, is getting better, but it was pretty bad to start the season. So it's nice to see that he's kind of turning it around there. Everything else from tee to green has been solid. He's actually the number one player strokes gained off the tee this week, which I think is massive. You would think Rory McIlroy, you would think John Rahm. It's actually Patrick Cantlay who's the number one player from off the tee over the last 36 rounds. He's added a ton of driving distance, and he's hitting it accurately, and that's what you need to do in a major. He has this reputation, which I talked about before I bet him at the Masters, where he can't get it done in the majors. Now he's finished top 15, I believe, in 3 consecutive majors, and he's added Joe LaCava to the bag. So all of these things are positives. Things are trending in the right direction. He was my preseason pick to win the Open Championship. I still haven't even bet that because I haven't been able to buy low on it. He's probably around these odds for that too. And depending on how he looks, I might jump on that soon as well. But he's going to win a major soon within the next couple of years, I would say. And it seems to be another good opportunity while he's still clicking on all cylinders. My next bet is Justin Thomas. He was 9th in my model. He's somebody I wrote up in my tournament preview, so you can read more in depth on him there. But just somebody who can win a scrambling contest. He's won the PGA Championship twice at Quill Hollow and last year at the at Southern Hills. So he kind of backdoored his win there, but he also was playing in unfair conditions where he got a bad weather draw. He's one of the best around the green players in this field. I really do think this will end up being a scrambling contest. He's number 2 in strokes gained around the green. He has the distance to contend on a course this long. And we've just seen him play well on these types of courses. Everything's going to really boil down to the putter with him, but I think he can get focused, get dialed for a major, and hit enough putts where it's really more about lag putting for someone like him who has elite ball striking. So we'll see, but I feel pretty good about his chances this week. Max Homa is next. He was a future that I put in January, right after he won the Farmers. Yes. And he will be on my US Open card as well. Definitely somebody that you don't want to fade in California, but he has played well on the East Coast as well. He's won at Quail Hollow. He's won at TPC Potomac. He's also won at Riviera, which I think is a really good comp to this. Another player like Cantlay who has the game to play well in a major, but hasn't quite had the results where he's contended here. And I think that's the only reason why he's being priced. I got him at 50 to 1, but even at 40 to 1. I think he's just too due to have his game line up with a major championship. And this seems to be the right type of course that rewards hitting a straight ball off the tee with plus distance and, leaning on elite long irons. Homa is also tied with Cantlay as co-number ones in this 450 to 400 range. So somebody who can score well from that longer range and not fall back on the difficult holes. I'll go a little bit over here. This has been a long video, so I won't dive too deep into the bottom of my card. I think all the win equity is here, and then the last 3 guys I bet here are more like just really good numbers that I didn't want to pass up on, and I had some room on my card and wasn't really like jumping out the rest of the middle of the board for me. So Ricky Fowler, I got him at 90 to 1. You look at what Rose and Day have done this year, kind of turning back the clock and eventually just finding it all piecing together in 1 week. That's what Fowler has done. He's finished top 20 damn near every week this season. I think he's had 13 consecutive top 30 finishes on the PGA Tour. He contended at the Zozo, has that all-around game, has finished in contention plenty of times at the majors, but still chasing his first major win. I wouldn't be surprised at all if it came this week. Just a veteran player who knows how to play strategically, whose game is clicking, in all facets. I'll skip to Gary Woodland next. I got him at 125 to 1. Just an elite ball striker. You look at the numbers here. He's 5th in strokes gained off the tee. He's 8th in strokes gained tee to green over the last 10 rounds, 2nd in proximity 200 plus. So all the ball striking numbers that you want to see, he's elite in it. He's even 14th in strokes gained approach. So just striking it immaculately right now. Obviously the putter is bad, but he putted well at the Masters. He was top 15 in the field in strokes gained putting at the Masters. That was bent grass. That was the only time we've seen bent grass. So maybe there is something about bent that catches his eye. If he just putts level to the field, which is a huge ask, he'll be in the mix, and he's won a major before. So I just think it's a good value. It's a long shot for a reason, but he has the ball striking chops to hang with anybody in this field. And then lastly, Mito. I don't get a chance to talk about Mito very much anymore since he went to LIV. Didn't actually get to really talk too much about how I feel the LIV players are going to do this week, but I would say I expect in general a step back compared to the Masters from the LIV guys. There were 3, I think, top 5 finishers from LIV at Augusta, and I just feel like that's a course where you don't really need any semblance of form going in to play well. You kind of just know the shots, the course. You can lean on course history there. Here, I'm a little bit more concerned that the LIV guys just haven't been playing on difficult scoring conditions at all on that tour, and they haven't really had to grind, and every course they play is this like go low birdie fest so far, at least. Where they're not really being tested all around, and I think that's something that's going to be necessary to tap into that experience when we get to an Oak Hill. So in general, I'm fading like Cam Smith, DJ. Brooks, I think, is a different story because he just shows up when he needs to, but I don't think we're going to get these surprise like Patrick Reed and Phil Mickelson charging up the leaderboards this year. Mito, on the other hand, this is a redemption week. He embarrassed himself at the 2022 Southern Hills PGA Championship. I was, of course, there. I'm always betting Mito when I can. I was thinking about making this an unofficial bet and just like doing it and not endorsing it, but at 190 to 1, I do endorse it. We don't have a lot of stats from the LIV Tour, but he has been striping it from tee to green everywhere that we can get shot link data this year. Putting kind of comes and goes, but from what I recall with Mito, he was best on bent grass last season. So it's going to be hit or miss on the greens, but I mean, this guy's going to be haunted by the PGA Championship for the rest of his life if he never wins one. We don't know how many more majors he's going to get a chance to play in. And this is a course that is a stern tee to green test, and the tee to green game has not regressed since last year whatsoever. So it would feel so much retribution if Mito could come back and win this year at odds that are really just as long as he was last year. I mean, he was consensus like 200, 250 to 1 before he almost won in 2022. And now he is 190 is what I got him at. So of course I'm going to bet that number. I might even consider a top 20 on him. I'm not sure. It's kind of tough. Like he might have his demons come right back out. And that may affect his play again this year. We'll have to wait and see. But in any case, it'll be nice to sweat Mito again. I have no animosity towards him for going to LIV. I am excited to see him play again. So hopefully he doesn't embarrass himself. And hopefully we have a better result than we did in 2022. Okay, that is going to wrap it up for PGA Championship. I talked a lot. This is my longest video I've ever made so far on the channel, but I appreciate you guys sticking along throughout this video. I hope you found all of this information helpful. If you did, make sure you do comment, like, subscribe on this video. Follow me on Twitter at PGA Tout and check out my articles on thelines.com for everything you need to know week to week in golf betting. that's going to wrap it up. Thank you guys again, and best of luck with your PGA Championship bets.